Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. The last chapter of our story ended with Rick warning Brian and Heather that Derek, their builder's lack of experience, is causing problems. He's deviating from the plans for their dream home and costing them more money than anticipated. Despite this, Brian and Heather are both relieved they're finally seeing a lot of progress, although they are annoyed that the home is already looking a little different than they imagined. Heather is now closing in on the 6-month mark of her pregnancy and is really starting to feel the stress of her career, raising their existing child, and this home build affecting her health. Brian's doing his best to alleviate Heather's worries and keeps assuring her that it's all going to work out. While Rick may be concerned with the out-of-order progress happening on Brian and Heather's build, there's not much he can do now besides warn them. He now has new clients that require his time and attention, but that doesn't change the fact that his gut is telling him to find a way to make sure this young couple understands the seriousness of the mistakes happening. But for Brian and Heather, each bit of progress is great news. To them, it means the build is getting closer to the finish line, hopefully saving money, and with some luck, they might just move into their new home before baby number 2's arrival. Early one morning, Derek sends Brian a text message to let him know that the air conditioning company is showing up to start the installation. So Brian and Heather decide to stop by during lunch to check it out. Derek is feeling pretty good as he watches the HVAC contractor pull the last of the ductwork into place. The bathroom fans are already installed, and they've even cut holes through the exterior and the siding for the dryer vent. The plumbing and electrical are also moving along as well. All the pieces are starting to come together, and the construction site is starting to look like an actual home. Due to some of the rising costs, Brian and Heather decided to make a few more affordable choices than they previously wanted. For instance, they had originally planned on using a tankless water heater, but as their costs have continued to increase, they decided to go with a traditional gas tank water heater instead. And instead of the electric heat pump system that Rick recommended, they changed to a less expensive gas furnace. It seems like an easy switch, and Derek doesn't have any objections, and it's helping to control the budget. After the electrician, the plumber, and the HVAC company wrap up their rough ends and they get some inspections passed, Jake, the insulation installer, meets Derek on site to get started on the installation. After a quick walkthrough, Jake makes his way up to the attic and gets to work. He's almost halfway done spraying in the spray foam insulation when he sees a potential red flag and quickly calls his office. "Hey boss," Jake says, "I may need you to come out to the site and look at this. It seems like they've installed a standard gas furnace and water heater here in the attic, and there's ridge vents on the roof." "Hang on tight, I'll be there in a second," his boss says. Derek noticed Jake pacing outside on the sidewalk and assumed he's just taking a break, no big deal. But a few minutes later, another truck pulls out and a man gets out. He and Jake enter the construction site together and head straight to the attic. Jake's boss, Tim, owns the spray foam insulation company and has been doing insulation in homes for over 20 years. He's trained his employees well, and he's happy that Jake caught these mistakes and called when he did. Tim introduces himself to Derek and says, "Look, we have to stop working here. There's been a mistake, and this spray foam is the wrong insulation to have in a house with this basic gas furnace and water heater. You can either replace those, or we're going to have to scrape all the foam insulation out that we already installed and go back in with standard fiberglass bats." Derek gets defensive and says, Since when do appliances and insulation have anything to do with one another? It's becoming obvious to Tim that Derek doesn't know what he's doing. He explains to Derek that spray foam insulation seals the attic space, and in this unvented attic, there's huge risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Tim says, "Figure out if your clients want different insulation or different appliances. My company isn't going to have anything to do with a family dying because our materials were used incorrectly. If you want us to scrape the foam insulation off, it's about $3,000. I can have the office send you an updated quote." With that, Jake and Tim pack up their trucks and head out. They drive away while Derek is left with his mouth open, realizing he's made another naive and costly mistake. Just as Derek is regaining his composure, Brian and Heather walk in. They mention they'd be swinging by, and at that time, Derek was excited to show them all the progress. But just minutes before, he had been hit with some hard news. As soon as she walks in, Heather asks, "What's up with that janky hole in the wall outside? I want whoever cut that hole to replace the siding and redo it. It looks terrible." Derek takes a breath and says, it's okay, no big deal. That's just the hole for the dryer vent going through. The AC installer is going to be adding a louvered cover for that hole, and that'll take care of it. In the meantime, we have some decisions to make. It turns out your switches with the water heater and the furnace aren't quite as simple as we thought. We, Brian asks, you are supposed to be the professional here. We're relying on you to help make the right choices. But okay, show us what's going on. Derek leads Brian and Heather up to the attic, where less than half of the walls are covered with spray foam insulation. Derek says, it turns out spray foam insulation can't be used in a home with this regular gas furnace and gas water heater because it creates a carbon monoxide hazard. At this point, Brian and Heather are both seeing red, and Brian decides not to even try to calm Heather down this time. Heather says, are you saying that you just assumed something would work, but in reality you could have killed my entire family? Let's focus on moving forward here, Derek says. You can either choose a new water heater and furnace or pay to scrape off the insulation that's been installed and switch back to traditional fiberglass insulation. I think it's about $3,000 to scrape the insulation and replace it, or maybe around $10,000 to replace all the AC equipment and water heater. Either way, you're paying for it, Heather says, as she finds a place to sit down, rubbing her hand on her lower back, obviously in pain and stressed. I can't afford either one of those, Derek stammers. And we can, Brian barks back. I'm afraid to add up how much additional money you've cost us with your mistakes so far. First, we have to just get over this drop beam that we didn't even want in our ceiling. And now, after you assured us this change in water heater and furnace is okay, you think we can just drop another $10,000? Derek takes another deep breath. Okay, you're right, guys. I'm sorry. I'll figure this out. This was my oversight, and I'll find a way to get it fixed. As they're walking out the door, Brian feels a tinge of guilt as he looks at Derek, who seems to be completely defeated. It seems that they're all in over their heads. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Joining me today is my good friend, Toner Kersting. Toner owns a building performance company called Toner Home Matters. They are experts in building performance design, building forensics, and they do a lot of building performance litigation support.
Unfortunately, yes.
Which basically means that they are expert witnesses when something really hits the fan and the attorneys have to get involved and dig into the meat of what went wrong on the project.
That's right.
So, Toner, that all makes sense to industry people like me. But since this show is geared more towards consumers, tell us more in layman's terms about what you do and why that's important, and maybe even touch on what building performance is.
Yeah, sure. So, building performance it's an assumed responsibility. We believe that the products that we're buying are all going to perform properly. And in a lot of assumptions, we come to find out that those assumptions were incorrect. It's a deliberate act. To make something perform properly takes planning and effort and action and verification. It just doesn't happen. But as a whole, as Americans, we're expecting that everything's going to be just fine, right? And we know in other industries, let's take the automobile industry for a good example, building performance doesn't work. Otherwise, we wouldn't all had to return that Yugo that we got for when we were kids to drive, because that thing just fell apart. We have all been subject to safety recalls, right? But we don't really have that here. So there's a lot of people in that vehicle design effort to make it perform properly. And we're technically doing that, but for a house. And that it's a deliberate effort. The good thing is, if it gets missed, we have ways of getting into the project and figuring out, okay, what is the misbehavior here and how do we correct that? So that's the building forensics side of our business. We really are striving to put that whole segment of our business out of business. I mean, that would be a great thing, right?
Right.
But we know it's not the reality of the situation, especially considering we're the third largest building market in the United States, and 70% of our market doesn't have inspections. So we are the Wild West. We'll build more houses in Houston, the entire state of California this year. And imagine how much regulation they have there and how little we have here. And we're thankful for that, right? That's one reason why our houses are affordable. But what is the price for that affordability? And it's not that you don't get granite countertops or your wall is not straight, but it's the things that are not paid for that help keep prices low, that turn out to affect the durability, the resilience, the sustainability, and the healthiness of our structures.
Right. So you mentioned some parts of our market don't even get building inspections. Most people don't know. Tell us who's not getting inspected.
Yeah, so I would say everyone in the suburbs. Let's start with that, right? The city of Houston, of course, is our largest permitting division, but we're sitting in Bel Air right now.
Yeah.
And Bel Air is a good, I think actually in terms of city permits, Bel Air is one that's really, really good because you can communicate with them, right? They're not so black and white, but when you get to larger organizations like the city of Houston, they really don't have time to talk about things. So they impose a lot of standards that they believe that they're meant to, but they don't always understand what those mean. And probably for building performance dynamics, that was about 2010 when they said, hey, we're going to have this energy code criteria, and we're going to say that all houses must be meant or designed and verified to meet this standard. And it's not just for new construction, it's for remodels also. And that changed a lot of dynamics. So we actually teach a class on the rise of building deficiencies in relation to the energy code adoption and climate migration. So 2010, you were building houses in 2010. Mm-hmm. I met you in 2011, right? And the way that houses behaved then versus now is night and day. My business didn't even exist. Was there a toner even in the marketplace in 2010? No. There wasn't. I had to convince you just to take a meeting with me in 2011, right. And we work on every project together now. Yep. So who would have thought that that would be the scenario? But it was one that was a confluence of energy code creating a pressure differentiation, and the difference in pressures inside our structures affects thermodynamics. What's the other side that affects thermodynamics but the exterior climate or the outdoor climate? And that has become more and more egregious. So a tighter and tighter pressure, a more and more egregious environment outside, the net result is houses that don't perform, which has increased the concept of building performance design.
Yeah.
So I could never have planned for this, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that are kind of working against the average home.
Yes.
And, 90% of the builders out there have no clue, right? They're just building the way it's always been built. There's a pretty low barrier for entry, as we've talked about on some other episodes, for being a builder, unfortunately, in the state of Texas. And, you just can't use those same techniques that were used 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for sure 50 years ago. It's a whole new world.
That's correct. I mean, I have about 150 to 160 builder clients. Those are people that use us every single day on all one of their projects. But then we look at the Builder Association. It's the second largest builder association in the United States, and they have about 600 builder members, right? And they think that that only is representative of 20% of the builders that are actively working in our marketplace. Right. That is a lot of folks. So we like to say that we work with pretty much the top 10%. If I did the math, it's more like the top 4.5%. And it took us a long time to comb through those folks. But of course, there's a whole segment of architects that are just like that. In trades, there's the top of the top. That doesn't always mean that they're the most expensive. And we're going to get that out there as soon as we can, right? Doing things right does not mean it's always the most expensive, especially if you're looking at the long-term value of this structure. It is not about getting to closing. It's about looking back 10 years later in ownership and how much did that house cost you?
So we'll come back around to that in just a minute. I wanted to touch on our story that we've heard about Brian and Heather and their whole sordid tale that we've been spinning on some past episodes. Have you ever seen people make those kinds of mistakes in real life?
Yeah, the brothers of the world are out there, right?
I'm asking that question knowing that he sees this on a daily basis, like 10 times a day, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so when we last saw our heroes, Brian and Heather, their house had finally struggled through the rough-in stage. Derek, their builder, he kind of used a mishmash of whatever's cheapest, and he put together some products that never should have gone in the same home together. Like he put a generic house wrap from the big box store on top of OSB sheathing, and then he grabs a roll of whatever window sealant happens to be laying around the shop. He put open cell spray foam on the whole house, including the subfloor, in the crawl space, in the floodplain. They're doing spray foam insulation. Nobody communicated that to the AC guy and the plumber, so now they've got a gas furnace and a gas water heater, and there's ridge vents on the roof. I know that some of this may be Greek to some people, but tell this tell us why all this is a really bad thing.
And the thing is that I know that this is a scenario that we're utilizing to help communicate the importance of this, but that is my actual every single day.
Yeah.
So this time tomorrow, I'm going to be at a house in College Station. All right. And why is College Station important? It's the fastest gentrifying market in the state of Texas.
Wow.
And an extreme boom of housing. And there was a couple who built a house, they moved into it, and they had 3 kids, and she's pregnant. And she was not doing well on her blood results. Now, you check your blood, of course, a lot more regularly when you're pregnant. When you were pregnant, did you? Oh, you didn't. That's right. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. Anatomy is not my thing. So, but she noticed that her blood work was off. Well, and they couldn't figure out why. And it was carbon monoxide poisoning. So late in this stage, their insulator, who was showing up to put in the blown in insulation, which one of the last things we do, right, said, hey, we have a deal on spray foam. Do you guys want us to spray foam your attic?
Oh, no.
So they did it in the last week of construction. And of course, they have open combustion furnaces, water heaters, and now all of that trapped dirty air is just dropping down. And who is the most exposed to carbon monoxide? Kids, babies, pets, and old people.
Yeah.
Right? Because of their immune system. So that she is extremely concerned. Fortunately, they caught on to what was going on, moved out, and we're going there to start. That is going to be a litigation project. But we do want to get them back in order and back in their home. And on top of that, the spray foam installer didn't understand that you have to check the moisture content of the rafters, and they were too wet. So it offset the moisture. So not only do they have a carbon monoxide problem, they have a volatile organic compound problem. Yeah, that was just a phone call from last week, and now I'm there this Thursday to help them figure that out. But we want to avoid that stuff.
So it's really important to make sure that all the products that are being used in a home, number one, they're being used in the right application, like the right climate. Like some products are not suitable for Texas.
Yes.
But they're used everywhere else in the country, right? And that the products have to work together as a system. You can't just pick and choose the cheapest product off the shelf. They all have to work together, right?
Correct. And that builder, in his defense, he's only as good as his worst contractor. And because he doesn't educate himself, he doesn't take the opportunity to be a proactive builder. He is our classic reactive builder. He's like, hey, the insulator said this would be a great deal. Sure, go. He only knows what he knows. And which really isn't very different than the homeowner. They only know what they know. They're hoping that the folks that they hire, especially the builder, are going to be that Sherpa for them. And that's not often the case.
He probably thought he was helping them by offering the spray foam at a discount, right?
He thought he was killing
like, hey, guys, I got a great deal for you.
Good deal.
I'm your hero.
Yes, exactly. And the crazy thing is, that's not going to be covered under his insurance. GL is not going to cover that. The spray foam contractor said, well, I installed it per manufacturer's installation instructions, but the manufacturer's installation instructions were not written per climate zone. So and of course, when I talked to the manufacturer, like, oh yeah, of course we know that. It's not in your instructions. So here we are. That's kind of a really good example, but it is a mess of a job. And it's unfortunate that I don't think that anyone has been hurt at this point because it was very low exposure. I mean, if you're worried about VOCs, don't go into a furniture store, right? Like that's a
right.
horrible, that's like
or a new car.
Or a new car. That new car smell is cancer. So let's be honest about that. So that is an end result. But if you made a plan from the beginning, you never would have been there, right?
So the other problem that I see with mixing and matching product, there's the performance issues, but also when you mix and match products, it can like void a warranty on a product, right? Because hey, our product is only supposed to be installed using our fasteners or our adhesive or in this manner. And if you use some other guy's tape to install it or the wrong screws or whatever, it can void the warranty. And then if you have an issue later, they're like, sorry.
Yeah. Well, in kind of in your summary example, when they do that, we use that weather resistant barrier, right? Which that's what Tyvek is. It's a weather resistant barrier. There's all kinds of manufacturers of it, but that is a weather resistant barrier. There is not a real great dynamic that comes from that. People have become overzealous or overconfident in that material. I can make a case that it's almost a negated material in some scenarios. But if you put Tyvek up and then you use zip tape on it, that will void the warranty. Not because it necessarily is a performance issue, but they're too contradicting manufacturers, and they don't want anything to do with each other.
Right.
So
other than product selection, using the wrong products, the wrong matching of products, or installing them in the wrong manner, what are some other common mistakes that you experience builders making, or that a decision a homeowner makes the builder goes along with? What are some common mistakes?
I would say some common scenarios that create unintended mistakes. We like to run our business with a lot of positivity, right? Like, people are not trying to make mistakes. They just find themselves in that scenario. So let's talk about one scenario that is classic that needs to stop is the 3-bid scenario, right? So when you're a homeowner and you have a set of plans, whatever that quality of plans are, they obviously need to come with a detailed set of specifications, because the plans look good. They do not tell you those details. So if you take that and you go out to bid between 3 people blindly and you're not paying for their time, then that's just like every governmental RFP, right? The person who wins is the one who makes the most mistakes. And you're assuming that has been thought out, right? And you don't realize that those mistakes have been made until it's, quite frankly, too late. I'm not a big fan of that process. I like paying people to be intentional. And there's some people call it different things. Sometimes it's a pre-construction and pre-service agreement.
Project development.
Yeah. And it's one that's really supported by the National Association of Home Builders. And I think in this market, it makes even more sense than it did 4 years ago, because everyone's so busy.
Yeah.
If a builder is just available to give up 40 hours of his time, we got to question why. Right now, if he's starting his business and there's a logical reason there, but a good builder would not necessarily have that time available, but you can pay them for that effort. And if you choose them, great. But it brings everything up to the surface, and it's all above the board. And it even lets you fully evaluate the difference between a cost plus or an all package, right? And it's gonna lay out what those decisions are, because the homeowners need to be involved in all of those decisions. Too many builders make bad decisions on their homeowners' behalf.
Right.
And if you're a homeowner and you're not willing to take that time, then you should question maybe just renting, right?
Right.
Or that's when a spec home or a production home or something might be a better option than a custom home or a semi-production home, like something that some of these larger production builders get into. But be mindful, you're going to end up with something that someone else already has.
Yeah. You're kind of stealing my questions in advance,
okay.
which is great. I love it. So actually, one of the questions that I ask everybody kind of toward the end, but we'll talk about it now, is what kind of person shouldn't go through the custom home process? What kind of person should just buy that house in the suburbs or go rent something?
If time is a very, very key dynamic in the limitation of it, then you should consider not doing a custom home. If you have 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, if you have less than a year, don't do a custom home. Like, you could get through it and you will be regretting it for the next 5. Go to something that's already been pre-thought out, right? Or go ask your builder that you do like, do you have any plans that you've built previously that you'd be able to modify? I love that idea of really the modification of a previous plan. I mean, let's be honest, most architects that are affordable, you're just getting a plan they drew before, right? I can name you 6 right now and probably go point out 10 of the houses that you are going to do. It's just a regurgitated 90s house over and over again. There's a reason why we see brick keys still in Bel Air, right? It's just some architect from the 90s sending a plan. So I think that's a beneficial thing. But if you can give yourself, that minimum, I think 18-month process from I want to build a house to move in minimum, you're going to have a house that meets your family's needs, not just for now, but one that's going to be 10, 15 years from now. And it's going to sell for more. It's going to be more valuable, and it's going to hold up in design longer. So
back to kind of the building performance side of things, long term, can somebody actually save money long term with good performance design in the services that you offer?
Sure. We pay for ourselves kind of in 2 ways. The first way is during the design and construction process and time, cost, labor efficiencies, things like that. So for instance, on the construction side, the way that we design our envelope is because I benefit from last year we did over 600 failure projects and brought them through resolution. So we're learning on the backs of everybody and we're baking that out of the front end.
Right.
And I know, and you know, that the fewer number of monkey paws that touch that project, the better, right? And when we're designing an envelope assembly, one that has a lot of dynamics going into it, from the envelope goes from the finished cladding through the finished interior surfaces. So that's a really thick sandwich. And every layer I can remove from that and bring in ease is major time, right? It may be a more expensive dynamic because you're looking at to a 1-to-1 ratio that is not fair. You need to be looking to a 1-to-3 ratio. And what a lot of those when you're looking product to product, that labor ratio is not always folding into it. And especially when we're dealing with cornice crews and framers where they charge maybe by the foot, they would charge by that foot and then not realize, oh my gosh, it actually is a totally different wall. So we've been through so much of that we bring in elements that simplify that process to try to save on that, bring us some grace in terms of time, cost, and labor efficiencies. But then the net result, when they move in, I've done a good job if you don't know I've done a good job, right? Like you don't know that I was ever here.
Yeah.
Like I'm the ghost, right?
Your stuff's not the sexy stuff, right?
Not the sex. But when it is amazing, and I know this from litigation, when I have clients or homeowners there at arbitration, and they're like, I had one the other day, and they said, I spent $250,000 on this house. That exactly tells you how they feel about that spend, right? Some people would say $250,000, but to them, that was $250,000. Right. Total different way of saying things. And that's important to them. And they're like, I expect she said it again, $250,000. I would not have a house that grows mold behind my kitchen cabinets. Well, the steps that are required to design a house so you don't grow mold behind your kitchen cabinets, that would have been a $300,000 house. So in the defense for everybody, and I was standing in between, I was hired by all parties, which is a lot of what we do. I try to not choose sides, but to say, if you want to solve your problem, we can tell you how to do it. Then you all can figure out who pays for it.
Right.
And the argument was, if we had done that, you would have paid for it. So you can pay for it now, right? You've got to know you're getting what you bought. And people are very disappointed when it doesn't perform.
Right.
Because they never bothered to ask if it was going to perform.
Right.
So,
yeah, we've seen that several times where, and honestly, we all make mistakes. I've had that on my projects. I've had clients say, I spent $1.5 million with you and I have this going on. And I'm like, well, I suggested that we do it this way, but you demanded on doing it this way in order to save $20,000 so that you could have nicer appliances.
Yeah.
Again, it's not the sexy stuff.
Yeah.
They don't get to see that performance. They do get to see that Sub-Zero refrigerator, right?
Yeah, and I love to use the ROI example. I have especially my my accounting clients. What's the ROI of doing this? I'm like, what's the ROI of your countertop? You're gonna throw it away in 20 years. What's the ROI? 90% of what you see in a house is the worst ROI ever. If I have $1 worth of ROI, I've outperformed 90% of the finishes in this structure.
Yeah, the work that you do is going to last like the lifetime of the house. The finishes are going to get changed out every 15, 20 years. The AC is going to last maybe 15 years if they're lucky.
20 years out of an AC system now. It's easy for me to say that because I'll be dead, right? Like, I'm not going to be here. I won't be dead. Hopefully not. If I'm dead, you're way gone. So it's not, but we won't see that. And that's a capital expense. Like, we expect that. But if we can stretch out another 5 years of life in our AC, and there's so much changing with that. I mean, we are the HVAC capital of the United States here. We're 87% of our power consumption, more air conditioning days than anywhere else in the United States. And that's only increasing. We have the highest average overnight relative humidity, which is really important to the embodied energy in our structure and embodied moisture in our structure. And we are hot and humid. I love that Austin thinks they're in the hot, humid climate zone. Like, yeah, that's right, guys. No. And this is this is a horrible place to build a house, man. Like, this is egregious.
Yes.
I don't know if there's, Galveston might be the only place worse than this, but that's our beach. So we don't want to talk smack about it.
Houston South.
It's Houston South. That's right. But there's a big difference between building on the coast, building in the woodlands, building east of town, and then look at Katy. You know what coastal prairie is? That's Katy. That is actually a really, really wet, heavy wind load there.
Right.
And that was my appointment before this one, was coming from a production home in Katy that's has a high volume of moisture content inside the walls, their garage hot walls. And I had to explain to them what that wind load was and look at the occupancy and go, they're like, well, we're nowhere near the water. I'm like, but you actually are. I mean, this is all old rice field.
Yeah.
That's why I can't get a dove out there. They're too hot.
They're like, hey, where'd my swamp go?
No, I just rest on the roof. That's right.
So it sounds like, the positives of what you do far outweigh the, well, there aren't any negatives, right?
No.
It's nothing but positives. So why do you think so many builders and architects, house designers, they're hesitant to engage your services, or they're hesitant to try to incorporate correct building techniques?
Yeah, and I would say that to kind of reframe that, and this may be just to help my ego.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them that do, right? We have a lot of clients that this is their every single day.
Sure, but we talk about how you're working with the top
10%.
4.5%.
4.5%.
So that means, 95.5% of builders aren't.
So one challenge is this is a really unique business model to me. There's not a lot of people who do what I do across the United States, because in a lot of markets, I'll bring up Austin again, because we're picking on Austin, right?
It's fun.
Building a house in Austin is like B team girls basketball, right? This is the NBA drunk.
Sorry, Austin builders.
Sorry, Austin builders. Sorry, all those who, I would always also tell everyone in Houston, if you're watching videos of people in Austin, you got to rewrite that stuff for here, right?
Yeah.
It's a totally different scenario. But there's just, we are a microclimate. We literally are. And we're the point of the spear for climate migration. So even stuff that worked for us 3 years ago, we had to modify. I mean, we're going to be releasing our new specifications in 2023. And it's the biggest change I've ever had. I mean, let's just talk about what you do all the time is construction climate control, right? Like, that was the big boys. That was River Oaks kind of stuff 10 years ago. We never saw package systems in Bel Air or West U, or even, let's talk about West Memorial. That's a challenging place to build a house, because folks still are trying to drive down to that $200 per square foot rule. And that's the only way you get that low, is by just egregiously ignoring what I do.
Yeah.
So that's one answer. I would bring that back to economics, right? The builder himself is typically reactive. So they don't, and if they're in a 3-bid competition, they're not going to come to someone like me and say, hey, I want to do this well, but let me be more expensive. Not because I'm doing something that shouldn't be done, but because the other two are not. So economically, they risk losing that work. So then you take it to an architect who's already architects don't make a lot of money, right? They do well by doing as many projects with the lowest number of people possible. So implementing processes, you know this, you and I, on top of working together, we're business buddies, right? Which we bounce business growth ideas and stuff out for each other and how we do things. And I know how hard it is to implement a process. Like, having to rewrite the content on my website makes me want to kill myself.
Yes.
But it goes stale, but it's finding the time to do that. So asking an architect who is a creatively minded individual to do a not creatively minded process change is just inherently difficult. So it's hard, which is, why we're making an effort, especially starting next year, to go straight to the homeowners. We used to only work for builders. Then we started climbing up the ladder and only working primarily with architects and then builders. And now, especially, I had a meeting, my second meeting today was a double house set, and they found us through, thank God for Houston referrals, right? Like, this is the biggest small town ever.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And even you got a goofy name, it goes even farther. And they found us through the network that is, and we've had the fastest growing segment of new clients for us on new side design are straight homeowners.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Within a 45-minute conversation, it all makes sense. We just got to have the opportunity for that conversation.
I think the consumers are getting more educated. There's a lot of building science YouTubers out there now that's grown, which has actually helped us in a lot of ways. There's some negatives there because a lot of those guys are putting out some content that may not be relevant to our market, but just the fact that the homeowners are more aware of building performance, building science, it helps us. And so an educated consumer is the best thing, which is why we're doing this podcast. Is my whole intent here is to educate the consumer, guide people through this process, right?
Well, and isn't the precursor to education awareness, right? Like if they don't know that they should be educated in this, they'll never go seek.
You don't know what you don't know.
They got to know the library is even open. So before they go get the book, and this is that highlight. So
yeah. So what are some of the simplest things that you can integrate into a new home design that will have the biggest impact of all the array of things that are in your specifications book? What are some of the simplest things that can be implemented?
Sure. I would say, and I'm gonna make sure we understand we're talking about new construction.
Yes, new construction.
Because remodeling is a totally different beast.
Yep. I'm gonna have a whole separate podcast series just focused on remodeling.
We can come back and talk about remodeling building performance, right?
Yeah.
That's a totally different scenario.
Yeah.
And actually, some of my favorite scenarios. We did one today for a family who's living with a severe sensitivity to mycotoxins, and they're shopping for a new home, and they can't afford new because the new won't be built to those standards. And then I said, okay, if you can go find a box over box brick structure, that's a really resilient one that I can work with, right? Lots of attic air volume. So when we're talking new construction, there's really two key things if I could make the shift as an industry as a whole. And the first one is no more ventilated attics. There's no such thing as a properly ventilated attic. Replacing hot, wet air with hot, wet air is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
And ventilation is only to manage dry bulb conditions or heat. So as you're letting in this hot, wet, egregious Houston air, at best, the hot air would move out, but the moisture will not. And I don't care about heat. I'll take a hot attic all day long. Let's look at historical attics on the island. Are non-ventilated. Even houses built in the 90s and today are not ventilated, but they are not enclosed. So I only have one factor to deal with there, and that's heat, because the amount of sea air coming in is egregious. So give me a hot, non-ventilated attic, I'll take it. So, but what we're looking for is a sealed attic enclosure. Keeping that heat out of the space, keeping that moisture out of the space, and then being able to utilize that spray foam. There's a lot of really bad internet information about spray foam that's still antiquated. And if someone's looking that up and it says 2006 on the video, we probably want to question that because it is an extremely common product to the point now that we do the building performance design for a couple really, really large production builders, and they're all spray foam. And they would not take the risk across thousands of houses a year without knowing that is an extremely safe product. And the second would be, there is zero purpose for a gas furnace in a house. Like, I teach classes with hundreds of HVAC contractors in it.
But it heats so much better.
It heats so much
feels better. The heat feels better, right?
Yes. And I don't want gas air conditioning. I love that statement because what we don't realize is 87% of the time we have an all-electric HVAC system, right? It's only when we need those average days for temperature. Gas furnaces, I beg HVAC contractors to tell me what the benefit of a gas furnace is. And there is zero benefit from it. Additionally, with our new envelopes becoming tighter and tighter and tighter, a good example of this not far from here is West University, right? They're at the 2021 energy code. So I'm less than 3% total envelope leakage. That's the same as a hospital room.
Yeah.
And I can't go burn an open furnace in one of those guys, right? So we have to have sealed combustion appliances. But a heat pump, this was a heat pump market originally, and there were some historical factors with power utilities that forced us into a gas system, not because it was more efficient, but because it would reduce the load on the electric grid. So we were forced into this gas market, not because it was a great idea, but because it made more money for the utilities.
Right.
Heat pump is awesome. And we're able to heat our house, except for maybe an average of 4 days a year in Houston. And then our heat strip would kick on. But then the new heat pumps, I don't even have to have heat strips. They run down to 4 degrees ambient outside. which is
Yeah,
awesome.
which will never hit here.
Well, we got close to it. We didn't hit it though. Yeah. And that way we remove that heat strip, which is awesome because, city of Houston is one of the largest cities in the United States that requires all new homes be pre-designed for solar. And that's my responsibility.
Yep.
So I want to make sure our systems can support that kind of solar perpetuity.
Yeah. So that's a great example of choosing products that work for our climate and not for another climate, right? Because people say, oh, heat pumps don't work. Well, they might not work in Minnesota,
Ohio.
Right? But in Houston, they're fantastic, right?
They're fantastic, and I love the oil and gas guys. Oh no, we gotta have gas.
I gotta burn some dinosaurs.
I gotta burn it up, man. Because that natural gas from that furnace is really making you go up. Right? I think we're dependent. That commodity is dependent a lot more than your furnace.
Yeah, that $50 a month that you spend on your natural gas is gonna
That's right.
really help your stock price, right?
Yeah.
So let's change gears a little bit. What are some services that you offer that most people don't take advantage of? And of course, you might say all my services.
Yeah.
But are there any specific services within your umbrella that you offer that people should be taking advantage of?
We actually just kind of bumped into it, so it's a pretty good segue. The solar design is different for us now than it was when it was first implemented. Before, it was almost a nuisance, right? It was the city's response to some federally regulated. Most municipalities had to respond on how they were going to address alternative energy, right? And one way is to make a plan to say, hey, we will start utilizing this in municipal structures or whatever. Another one is say, hey, we're just going to pre-design all of our houses for it. And that's really kind of the goal in the long run across the United States. But since then, we've seen such a big development, especially in the lithium ion battery space, where they're affordable now. And once we could move away from the idea that it's a panel first scenario, which is what solar companies want to sell, right? They want to make money. But when we do designs, I'm not a solar company. I don't care about the margins there. I want to design the system that's best for the scenario. Yeah. So we do solar perpetuity, not net zero, which means it's battery first, storage first, and then back charging that. And the great thing in that scenario is we're a town that's dependent on storm resiliency. This is a nutty place for storm. And so a natural gas generator, everyone would want one. Those are generally, a whole home natural gas generator, $20 to $30,000 for a small house. So I'm able to take those funds and apply them towards the batteries as the storm resiliency factor. And now we have some of the most affordable solar systems because we're able to double dip and use it for storm resiliency. And 70% of my houses now, they're lithium batteries and no more than 4 panels for the same cost as that whole house natural gas generator. Except when the natural gas generator, you only get to use it when the power goes out.
Right.
And it sounds like then a bus is going in your backyard.
Yeah, the solar is year round, right? Like you're helping your electric bill.
Right now, I could go get my phone and check. I know my batteries are full. I could flip the switch and I could run off the grid for 3 days. And I only have 2 batteries on my personal house.
Is that running the air conditioner too?
That's running a 30,000 gallon pool.
Wow.
On top of it. So I have a really big koi at my house. So, but that's a better natural gas generator is an abandoned asset. This is not. This is something that we can utilize on a regular basis, right? And they all have storm watch anyways. Like you just did. I wonder if it picked up the thunder that just boomed in here.
I don't know. Probably.
Hopefully it did.
Yeah.
Right. So with storm watch, which is something that's pretty standard, especially like on in-phase batteries, which is a really, really cool, good home battery. It knows when there's a storm in the area and it will not let you exhaust the batteries. So it's not going to let you fall into a scenario, right? But an average 2 battery pack on the average home is going to give you 4 days of standby power.
Wow.
Most of us have not experienced more than 4 days of power, but you still have to have at least 1 panel on it. So the panel will still start recharging. And even if I didn't, there have been times where I have not utilized my battery that's capable. It just pours over and I get grid set back. I get grid credits. So I have a second structure that I own. And that second structure, I actually pay for the electricity on my second structure from the overflow on my primary structure. So it's not only storm resiliency, backup power, solar perpetuity, but it's also a microgeneration facility for my other structure.
That's super cool.
Yeah, for the same cost. Like, oh my gosh, man. But that's contrary to the retail solar guys
who
are really just trying to sell you enough solar that you give up paying an electric bill to pay them instead. That is a Rob Peter literally to pay Solar Paul. So,
okay, so a couple other questions that I try to ask everybody that comes on. One you already answered, and that was who should go through this process. On the flip side of that, what's the dream customer? What is your dream customer?
Yeah, they have to be super cool, like good looking kids,
like me.
Yeah, there we go. Someone who we don't have a whole lot of second time custom home buyers, right? Versus like in other markets. So I think I've told you this before, but I try to go to one other prospering city or a city where the market is really, really booming. And I go there by myself and I like to walk through all these different houses, and I'm technically trespassing in other cities, but you've walked through other people's houses and stuff to check them out. Time. Yeah, but everyone's pretty cool. That's Houston though. Also, like we're kind of spoiled that everyone's pretty cool here.
Right.
But I like to see what they're doing in other places. But I also know in other markets that the homeowner is more house mature. The average home ownership, for instance, in a couple other cities is well over 17 years, where we're only 5.5 years. So generationally, their kids have been there when those things fail. We're still in kind of a disposable house mindset here. So we don't have that house maturity. So someone who's coming into it with that understanding that they're willing to hire professionals to do this for them and respect their opinions. Not saying that they're going to be railroaded. No one's in the business of doing that, but trust folks to do their job and lay it in front of you and make good decisions. It does take marginally more time on the upfront. But the back end, especially that last, half of that project from sheetrock forward, man, that is where you make up some time, right? Everything's dried in. Cabinets have been pre-ordered, appliances, like we're rolling now. And that's when things get really, really, really exciting. And that's when the pretty stuff starts. If you think about it, half of the build is ugly.
Yeah.
Half of the build is everything that we touch, right?
Or over half, yeah.
Over half. And you're never going to see it again.
Yeah.
Just in how many people have actually understood how much time you take to watch a slab get poured. Man, isn't that like to me, it's one of the most nerve-wracking parts. Because everything has to be set up right. It's held in suspension, quite literally.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that it pours and it doesn't get pushed out of place. And this is it. The foundation, of course, of the house, but it's the foundation of this build. It's going to be here for 60, 70 years, at least. The average of tear down in the city of Houston is 65 years.
Yeah.
So,
but hopefully what we're building now, is more resilient than that or lasts longer than that. I think a lot of our housing stock was kind of post World War II, almost built as a throwaway housing.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't
meant to be a 100-year house necessarily.
No, not at all. But to pontificate on that, I imagine that based on density alone, we'll have to rip down most of our big houses just for 4-packs eventually, right? We're gonna. Yeah. Even as space abound as we are, we're gonna run out of space internally. So, or inside that loop or inside that segment. And we've already seen that. Look at Jackson Heights, right? Those were all bungalows, and it's nothing but a small bungalow torn down less than 50 years after being built. They were built in the 1950s. By 2000, they were all torn down, and there's 4-packs on them. Yeah. So density will offset that eventually.
I just saw the city put out some new proposal for allowing more dwelling units on a property.
Yeah.
I saw a news release about that yesterday. So that's definitely coming.
That's definitely coming. The whole ADU thing is going to be really interesting how that plays out here, where we've not been really forced into it. It's not like East Austin where they had to, right? Like those lots are the only way you offset those costs. We're not like that because we still have really, really, I like to remind our homeowners of the time, it's still really cheap to build a house here, y'all. By national standards, we're killing it.
Oh, yeah, totally. I have a good friend who builds in Los Angeles, and we talk all the time, and he's like, yeah, we're building for $1,000 a square foot or $1,200 a square foot. And they're getting the same product that I'm building for maybe $300 to $400 or $500 a square foot. So we're half the price.
Yeah.
Half the price to build a house here.
Half the price. And so in terms of performance, I went looking for other markets that were having performance issues and how they got over them. I'm like, I'm going to go to Miami, right? Like Miami's nasty. That place is going to, everything should be falling apart. So I went there and I started in big houses and they're full of mold and they're nasty and they're made out of CMU blocks.
Yep.
And they're like, well, this is just Miami, y'all. Like, they didn't say y'all. I don't know what they said actually. But they were like, this is the expectation of quality is lower in Miami than it is in Houston.
Yeah.
But we have a similar climate. So I wish I could just turn to all of our clients and say, guys, this is just it.
Yeah.
It's just go clean it up and go.
Just got to deal with it.
We're not cool with that here. Yeah. They're cool. They also wear a lot less clothing in Miami. So being hot and sweaty is like normal passion for them. But a CMU block wall assembly is something that you can repair. I can repair paper, right? So crazy. I thought Miami would give me the answers, and it gave me the answer that I'm in a really tough spot to make egregious climate perform to not matching standards.
Yeah. Maybe it taught you that we should all just chill out here and
that's right.
Hit the beach more often. I don't know. All right. So I know that you've got some horror stories of projects gone bad. You and I have consulted on some of them together. Pick your favorite house horror story and tell us about it.
So, I knew I was coming here today. So I thought, and I knew that you might ask me that question. So I'm like, I'm going to go geographical. I'm going to find, because we track every project, every failure. I actually have this really, really, really interesting photosphere of where I have taken, it records every place that I've added photos into one of our forensic profiles. And it maps it across the city in these glows. And the more I get, the more it glows red and red and red and red.
Heat map.
I can literally see my forensic heat map across the city of Houston. I would never sell that to anyone because it's actually it's pretty scary, actually. So it's actually not that, it's pretty high right here. Bel Air has a lot of builders in a really small space. And it's a area that has grown in spits, right? Really, really busy and slow down, and then really, really busy. Yeah. And it's really cute. Like this is the diagonal streets, the development. Bel Air, we saw so much redevelopment in this space, but because of that speed of growth doesn't necessarily mean that the quality is going to follow. No one said, hey, get through that test fast.
Yeah.
Right. That's not how you complete a good test. They always say, slow down and do your work, right? Do your best. It's not speed up and do your best. So there was a project not too far from here, big corner lot. It was about not too large, 7,100 square feet, large enough to be, but and when you have an elevated house at 7,100 square feet, that's a lot of house.
Yeah. Because tall.
Yeah, that's tall. That's 3,000 square feet of underside, right? And it's on a corner, you see this house. It's like taking up a lot of space. And this was about 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, we were under an energy code that still allowed us to have open fireplaces. And we'll see open fireplaces today still.
Right.
I don't know how that passes code. You cannot have an open combustion fireplace in a house per code. And it goes on. How does that happen? Because I'm probably the only guy in town that actually does a formal energy certification.
Yeah.
If you hire a little raider for $1.25, you're going to get a sticker and he's going to bail. If anything went wrong, there's nothing to sue.
And the city is not necessarily going to catch that.
No, the city is trusting that he's doing his job.
Right.
But he won't. I mean, because he's not getting paid enough. And that's the builder market. That's the market forcing us down to the lowest common denominator, which is an economic factor in almost every industry. But big open fireplace. And where's that open fireplace in the living room? If I put my back to it and walk across, what do I normally hit on the other side of the room? The cooktop.
Right.
Big, giant, 60-inch gas, holy junk, open campfire fireplace.
1,200 CFM hood.
1,800 CFM hood across from a 60-inch opening.
It'll suck your dog out the chimney, right?
And they did a vent, the fan motor they put in the attic so they couldn't hear it. So they're there. Their au pair is there, actually. And they're cooking on it like one little plate of scrambled eggs for the one kid that they have, right? And she turns on the exhaust on the hood vent, but you can't hear it. And it's pulling 1,800 CFM. And where is it receiving that makeup air from? it's receiving it down the flue pipe. Now, this is a masonry firebox. So masonry firebox, you want to explain what that is, the difference between a masonry and metal firebox?
Yeah, so it's a fireplace, a firebox. It's actually made out of bricks, laid versus a metal insert that gets shoved into the wall, a factory-built fireplace.
Yeah, and they look beautiful, right? It looks like Hansel and Gretel should be cooked here.
It's the best way to do it, yeah.
Best way to do it. But we're different. In other markets, that masonry fireplace would have a masonry flue. And masonry flues, if they turn, it turns into a lot of effort to support that masonry weight. But the great thing about a masonry flue is the damper is at the exterior.
Right.
But here we do metal flue pipe.
Right.
And on top of that, the metal flue pipe is a B-vent, which means that it's a layer of metal pipe, gap of air, and another layer. And they're expecting that it's going to be air cooled. That is a northern product, y'all.
Yeah.
We don't want to air cool anything with swamp gas, right? So they're sucking in 1800 CFM of hot, wet air down a metal pipe on three sides, the outside of the pipe, the inside of the pipe, or the in between the pipe, and then the inside. But that is influenced by the air conditioning. So it's cold. So hot and wet hitting a cold pipe just rained water.
Right.
Now, when water is dripping down, it hits the top of that box and you don't see it, but it settled into all the cabinetry and then it backed into the wine room. And it turned into just 3 stories worth of mold and rot. And it only took 2 summers.
Wow.
Because the first summer, everything gets wet and then it dries out over the winter. When it does that, those materials, especially the organic, the cellular materials, wood, it expands when it's wet and it shrinks when it dries. Well, then it expands the cellular capacity. It can hold more water the next season. So now twice that. And then we get more latent moisture, super saturation, and it falls apart. We had a Vantech, which you build with a Vantech.
Sure.
And mind you, I just want to remind anyone listening to this, I don't get paid by any manufacturers for anything I recommend.
Same.
Yeah. It's just, otherwise, it would say for entertainment
purposes.
I did. Yeah. But
if you're listening at Vantech, I'd love to get paid.
But that's a really good product, right? I mean, and like we get hard rains on a Vantech and we can dry it out and everything's good. To rot a Vantech takes a lot of effort, and it rotted it out. And that's a really hard repair.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, in order to make it not happen again, I had to bring in 1800 CFM of makeup air. 1800 CFM makeup air is over 5 tons of cooling capacity. It was an entire second AC system.
Yeah.
And we didn't need that. And now, I mean, I'm glad that we were hired to do the job, to figure out what was wrong, and not just to clean it up, but to clean it up and fix it permanently.
Right.
And we did.
Did they ditch the masonry fireplace?
No, we kept it, but we went back with Class A pipe. So Class A pipe is metal wall, polyiso foam, hermetically sealed, and metal wall. So I didn't have that communication.
Right.
The reason why we're having so much condensation, it was convection. So the air was coming down and back up. It was coming down inside the wall and back up the pipe and down so it was just overcooling it. And then the outside just sweat its tail off. So, but we see that problem still today. I mean, I'd had that problem earlier this summer in a brand new structure, $2 million house. How did they get there? With what they thought was a super legit architect. How did that happen? So, because they think that, and they paid like $380,000 for that set of plans.
Yeah.
And no one thought this through in the set of plans because they're not trained in this.
Right.
And the builder was that classic builder you hire at $2 million. But he's like, hey, I just do what I'm told. That's what he said.
Yeah.
I just do what I'm told.
They give me the plans. I read the plans.
Yeah. I was like, do you understand? He's like, well, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm like, okay, then that's, by the way, if anyone tells you that, run.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite excuse. I've been doing this for 30 years. I was doing this before you were born, son.
Yes. I've been doing this for 30 years or 20 years. I'm
well, for 28 of those, you've been doing it wrong.
Yeah. When was the last time you went to, is it literally the same since in 20 years ago? And the funny thing is 20 years ago is the 90s now, right? Like that wasn't that long ago by my perception. But where houses have come, they're without building performance design, it's almost like it's still 1994.
Yeah. Perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings up another good point or comment that I had was that houses have just gotten so much more complex over the last 20, 50 years. And part of it's the energy codes that are tightening up, right? Part of it is we're just putting more and more stuff in a house. We're trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a proverbial 5-pound box. And so it's just like this perfect storm of all these things that are making building more and more complex. But at the same time, builders, building techniques, they haven't evolved to go along with where things have gone, right?
And they haven't. And I ask people ask me all the time, well, why is that? Why are we so far behind the curve? And the first thing I hear is, well, if we had a contracting license, right, we would be better. So then I reference my other states that we do work in, like Alabama, where there's a license, Louisiana, in Florida. They all have the same problems there,
right?
Because typically that license is merely some life health safety issues. It's built around a lot of the insurance industry requirements.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who still work in unlicensed areas. So they're not doing much better than we are. I don't want to say that we're the only ones having problems here. Lots of areas are having problems, but if I'll bring up the production builder is the best example of that. They would love to do these things, to do all of these other elements, to reduce their risk. They have the most financial incentive to gain here. But if they're the first ones who step out, then they stop selling houses because they automatically become $60,000 more than everybody else. So if you can't get that in a $900,000 production home, you're not going to get it in a $900,000 custom home unless the homeowner takes action to do that. The great thing about a custom home is the choice, right? You get to choose. And that's where builders, I believe, like to use this the most, because when I present the case to the homeowner and they choose not to do this, then they buy the warranty.
Right.
Like I have people that literally refer me to as the get out of jail free card, right? And they're like, hey, if someone doesn't hire Toner, that's awesome because I'm off the hook. But if they do hire me, they're also off the hook because it's technically because I'm standing behind the specifications that we apply.
As long as they get followed, right?
As long as they get followed. And we try so hard, just like you do. You try so hard to make everything happen. It's so many moving pieces.
Right.
And I was a home builder before I did all of this. So I remember telling my now wife, then fiance, was like, this job is great if we didn't have homeowners.
Yeah.
Right. Like if I could just build blankly and basically play professional Lego, I would totally do it.
Right.
But bringing in homeowners just complicates things. And I remember having nightmares over a homeowner freaking out about the color of their grout was not bone, but it was china, right? And I was 22 years old and I couldn't sleep the night before, right? And you probably had those scary nightmare dreams. You're like, oh my gosh, that's happening. And I think if your builder's not waking up with that, then it doesn't concern them that much, or she. And I want to make sure we understand that I think in Houston especially, our builder market, we suffer from the diversity, the how many, but we also win from that. You don't have to go that far to find a good builder, a good architect, a good engineering. I think is a little less important than it used to be, because the craft of engineering is no longer a craft. It's manipulating software, and the engineer has misapplied a lot of his technique to non-engineering essentials, which has led to like a slower growth in some of these development factors. I think it's not that hard to find a good engineer. I just want an engineer that wants to come walk his project. Like that's all I really want, right?
Right. So actually, in the last episode, we had Carl Brecken from BEC on. We're not knocking Carl.
No,
Carl's actually fantastic.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the things we talked about with Carl was how important it is for the engineer to also do site visits. And we just had the observation that, hey, if the builder's doing his job, if the engineer's doing site visits, if the architect's doing CA, if Toner's doing site visits, that's like 5 professionals that are walking your job before it ever gets covered up with drywall in multiple stages. You're just ensuring a better product all the way through if you let all the professionals do their job.
Most definitely. And I didn't know that you were talking to Carl. That's awesome. And he is one of those guys, and his partner Reese. I mean, getting first off, getting a Kiwi on our job site is like awesome to begin with. Right?
Actually, not knocking Carl. I tried to get Reese on the podcast.
Oh, that would have sounded so rich.
I wanted the Kiwi accent as a guest.
And I think that shows you how small of a town Houston is, right?
Right.
And they won't do a project. All their projects lead with CA, and we still have homeowners that choose not to select that option. But it was given to them, so that those options. And I want our owners to understand that these things are placed in front of them because it's important, and they need to understand the risk that's applied to it. And of course, we always have the in our scenario, we have Heather and
Brian. Yeah.
Heather and Brian. I don't know how Heather and Brian's marriage is working out right now, man. Who's calling the shots here? Are they working together as a team? Are they working against each other?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to the end of the story yet.
Right? I mean, it's a stressful scenario. And I'm a believer that the more people, a good team will help you through that process. And it's also refreshing to have different experts and different people holding that, because you're not getting tired of only hearing from one angle, right? It's a checks and balance too.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of wrap this up, because one of the things that we've talked about in all the episodes is just the importance of creating this team, right? It's you can't just hire an architect or a house designer or buy your plans on the internet and then just randomly hire a builder. You need to take the approach of, I'm going to put together a team, or I'm going to allow my professional to help me put together a team, right? So if they come to me, I'm saying, hey, we need to use this architect, we need to use toner, we need to use this engineer. I'm going to build that team. And a good architect is going to do the same thing.
Yes.
He's going to help you assemble that team.
And
if they come to you first,
I do the same thing.
You're going to say, man, you need to use Curtis, I hope. You need to use this architect. You need to, so any one of us can help you build that good team, but don't try to go it alone and do that on your own. Because if you have a bunch of people that never work together, you might get lucky and it might turn out great, or it might just be a train wreck.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually thankful for that other side of people not choosing the team, because it's made for a very, very robust forensic business for me.
Exactly.
So I eat from both ends of the trough. I can be there now or later, whichever one you want.
That's it. Exactly. Well, so I think we've covered all that we can cover today, but we always have so much to talk about. So I'm sure that we will do this again. For sure, talk about remodels.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we take a little bit of time to talk about historic structures in those remodels, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's even more different than just a remodel in itself. But yeah, remodels will be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So it's always great to hang out with you.
Yeah.
Last thing, if people want to connect with you or work with you, how do they find you?
Sure. Well, I'm actually the easiest person. I'm the only toner on the internet. Like I show up organically on page
they might
one.
find some Ricoh or some Xerox or something.
Right. No, they're going to find me behind some like very, very high-end facial solutions, and that's about it. But yeah, Toner Home Matters. We're just put that in there. You're going to find us. We go through our process and explain it online. We do consults for free. I do this today alone for new projects. I had 4 consults. I'm going all the time. We have a really, really great staff. And we're actually just down the street now. We just moved our office down to Southampton here in Houston.
Yep.
Much nicer restaurants than
Very
where
nice.
we used to be. Yeah, it's really cool.
Get the beer place next door.
Place right in front of us. Yeah. So it's we were real happy. We've been here for we're going on our 13th year of business. And couldn't be happier. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk. And I always have fun talking to you about stuff. We could go on and on and on. You actually need to come to one of those cities with me and you go trespassing.
Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah. Well, thanks. And
right,
thanks to you, our listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Here we teach that every successful project has 4 key components. And these 4 components are represented by a simple outline drawing of a house. The foundation is planning. The left wall is building a team. The right wall is communication, and the roof that protects all that is proper execution. So come back next week and hear our interview with Shannon Vestal of Steve Shannon Designs. Shannon's an interior designer, and she also co-hosts a podcast that they do. So we'll hear what's new also with our friends Brian and Heather and their journey to navigate this custom home building process. And we'll see what kind of trouble they get into next. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.